Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 18 of my Industrial Revolution 3 playthrough. In this episode, we are going to upgrade our factory with trains. Enjoy. Because if you look at what's happening with stone here, we've got some blue lights on our miner because the stone is gone. So, time to pull it out. And we can probably remove this because no more stone is going to come this way. And I kind of just want to leave the rest of the belts because they work. I don't want to break it, but we can look for more blue lights, and we have some here, so copper's starting to run out too. And because of the increased range of this drill, it does actually reach these patches right here. And we have our car here to deliver the stone as required, and clearly we are going through quite a bit of it, making all that landfill. Our iron here is a little slow. It's going at full speed. It is 7.5, but since we have updated the belts to red, it can now be 15, and clearly we need it because we are basically using every last ingot. Not that it matters too much, because eventually we'll get caught up. But for now, it is definitely our next goal. And the reason why we haven't upgraded it yet is because that would require a lot of trips. And since we have access to trains now, we can automate this. So now we need to make all of the components related to trains. Building things like the locomotives is pretty easy. They're a little expensive, but we don't need very many of them, so we can just handcraft these as required. We might want to consider if we want to do rail signals. We actually aren't going to need that many because this isn't going to be a particularly complicated network. But out of all of these things, the one thing we are going to need a bunch of are the rails themselves. And it's an interesting recipe where it uses just the straight iron ingots, as well as wooden beams and gravel. So those are three weird items that we need to figure out where the best place would be to make them. Looks like we have a belt here from where the boilers used to be. So might as well pull it out while we are here. Looks like our little supplementary steam plant to get rid of the steam from the pump jack is doing a pretty good job. This is definitely going to be a messy situation because all of this stuff is just kind of all over the place. But we would have the crusher there because we need to first turn the stone into gravel. And then after that, it can go into the rail machine. And their speed is, well, can't really check it. That is a disadvantage to how IR3 does things, is you need to actually fire up the crusher first, so the recipe gets set so we can actually check it. And it is linked, so that's good. You're going to need to make the wooden beams, and how does that look? It's plenty fast as well. So wood will come right here, and we have to be a little careful about it because there will be wood chips in here. So we say wood to the left, put that in there, and we'll start getting it. And then the last thing is the messy belt, where we need to bring in some of these ingots. And I kind of want to just put a belt right here so we're only putting them on one side, because we just aren't going to need that many ingots. Not sure how many rails we're going to need. We tend to need a lot of rails when we do need them, but for now, how about let's try the tin pallet and see what happens. That inserter is barely fast enough for what it needs, but it appears to be good enough. We need to make a request for rails. I think I'll just do 2 slots for now. We'll see about handcrafting these rail signals because we actually have the items in our inventory already. So it shouldn't be that difficult to do. So we essentially have 2 different train paths we need to do. One of them, oh hey, the biters actually attacked the wall here a little bit. So it held. But we have our stone outpost right here, and we have our iron outpost. So we need to put a train station in both of those, and then deliver the iron here, and probably deliver the stone in a similar place, and just have a belt coming up to get into the rest of this. So to do this, we're going to need to design a train station. And let's make 1 locomotive, and how about 4 train cars, and completing achievements. Lots of stuff to grab. The iron still quite hasn't made it all the way down here. One major element to when you switch over to trains is you want to decide on what kind of trains your factory will use as far as their size and configuration. Using a mod like LTN will allow you to be very flexible and have your factory actually use different types of trains. But if you're not using a mod like that, you probably want to commit to a specific type of train to make things easier. And let's start by designing an unloading station first. And we'll need a little bit of space to do this. That you'll have a rail coming in, and the train has to park somewhere. And then from there, we have our markings. So what I like to do is, I'm not sure what you call this, maybe a 1+4 configuration where there is 1 locomotive and 4 cars. There's 2 different ways of basically doing trains. One is single-headed, where there are only engines facing the front, or double-headed, where there are locomotives on both sides. The double-headed train will allow it to go in both directions. So if it goes to a dead end like this, it can actually turn around and go the other way. However, one disadvantage is that when the train is moving, this is a little weird. Let's do that. Make it look a little nicer. But the disadvantage to this is that the locomotive only powers the train in the forward direction. So if the train is going to the right, this locomotive is doing nothing. It is essentially dead weight. And if you look right here on the tooltip, you can see that a locomotive weighs 2,000. And if you look at the cargo wagons, they weigh 1,000. And the ultimate performance of the train is the weight of all locomotives and all cars. So if this train was single-headed with 1 engine, it's 2,000 and an additional 4,000 for the cars. So it would weigh 6,000. And it would have the appropriate performance. I'm not sure the exact Factorio numbers, but my guess is if it weighed twice as much, so if it was 12,000, then it would have half of the acceleration. The eventual top speed would be the same, but it would have half the acceleration getting there. However, if it was carrying an extra locomotive that was facing the other way, it's as if it has 2 additional cargo wagons that it's not using. So it would now have the performance of a 6-wagoned train, even though it only has 4. So that's kind of what you pay by having a locomotive just dragging on the back. And it becomes even worse if you have 2 locomotives, because you want the additional performance, because then you would have to have 2 on the back. So if you do this, it would be faster, yes, but it also weighs more too. So despite the fact you doubled up on the locomotives, the train is actually only going to be about 50% faster because you did this. So personally, I like to do the bigger trains because I feel there's just less train traffic. That I've definitely seen a lot of factories where people do something like this. And yes, this is incredibly flexible, but man, is it a waste of your essentially rail throughput, because you have so many tiny trains flying all over the place that to me, it just seems kind of, like it's excessive. It forces your train logistics to really have to be well designed, and it's just, why do that when you can just have a very traditional train with plenty of performance on it? So that's what I'm going to do, just the 4 cars here. It does mean every time the train goes into a station, it essentially has to turn around, so that's something you have to keep in mind. But it's not that difficult once you get used to it. The train needs fuel, and it essentially can take any of the fuel types that are in the game, including steam. So this can be a steam train, and it's not steam in the sense of you throw coal in and it's an external combustion engine, but rather it uses steam canisters. And for now, that's actually the only fuel type that we have. So if you use trains at the earliest opportunity that they are available, they will be running on steam, and that's fine. It'll be good enough for what we need. So now we need to unload it. And you could do it the traditional Factorio way of lots of inserters and then balancers and all of that. And that works fine, but we do have access to loaders, and I know I tend to avoid using loaders in many situations, but I think this is one that it is very appropriate for. Not only does it fit the aesthetic of you have a train coming in and then you have a chute where all of the resources just come out of it, but also it's just incredibly useful when it comes to balancing. So there's that much, and one other thing we need to do is to fuel up the train. And since we're not going to be riding this train, we can't rely on our inventory to fill it up with steam anymore. We still could do it that way, but since we're at this point, it's kind of important that we automate it. We're going to need our barreling machine. Let's just assume the steam will come from below here. We will need a filter inserter because we don't want to pull out the filled steam canisters. We only want the empty ones, and this will just go through its process and shoot them back in. And if we do all of that, we should now have an unloading station. So looking pretty good. We're going to need a second train. We're going to need lots and lots of rails, so we might as well grab some more, and it looks like we are basically out of iron. So this is a good time to get this done. Out of anywhere the trains can go, this seems like a pretty appropriate place for them to park. So let's build both of these stations in this general area and space them out a little bit, because that stuff is probably going to want to expand. I would like to use the same path if possible. So it would be something like this, and the train would come in there. Let's give it one space. About one space on the other side as well. And then it merges. So there's the train. Flash. That's a pretty cool name. We'll call this about iron unload. Well, one thing we need to do is hook the steam up, and it looks like there is a pipe right here, so that's nice. Because we're going to need to have fuel being delivered to every one of our train stations, or at least half of all of our train stations. Because at least one of them in every area, well, that's not going to be in the right spot, is going to need to have fuel coming in from somewhere. Might as well just put this here now. There we go. So the fuel will go in, and for now we'll just give it the 3 stacks. And since we are already here, how about let's place this next one in here. And how close do we want to do it? We want some space. It's not like things are super compact in here. So how about we do this? We'll change this one to stone unload. And we'll get to that later. Okay, well, time for some rail signals. Another thing you want to consider when doing your trains is what kind of tracks do you want to make? And because this is going to be a relatively simple factory with relatively big trains, the throughput on the rails is going to be small. So hopefully I don't regret this, but what I'm going to do is have a single rail system here. So in other words, one rail will handle all trains going both directions. And this works fine on the small scale. So basically what it means is that this whole rail right here going to these 2 mines can only handle 1 train at a time, but since they don't run that often, it's not that big a deal if they have to wait a little while. And if this ever becomes outdated, then we will have to upgrade the rails. But at least for now, this will allow us to upgrade to trains while spending a minimum amount of time doing so, because we're just not at the point of our factory where we're going to need this. And as a quick refresher to how rail signals work, there's essentially 2 types, the standard rail signal and the chain signal. I kind of don't want to make chain signals right now because I don't think we're going to need them for anything, but I'll point out how to do them later. When it comes to rails, you just want to split the different sections apart, and when you're placing them, you want to make sure they're on the correct side and try to make them look a little symmetrical. So if we do this, that will make both the left and the right independent of each other, but we also probably want to make it look kind of the same. So let's just put it there. They're flashing colors because there's a problem with the network, and as you can see, they're not completely independent yet. And we want to do the same to the other side, so let's separate them. And now no more flashing because they are independent. And you can kind of see that with the colors. So remembering that we are doing a 1-rail network, it means that we need to keep this rail section as 1 complete section. So for example, if we do something like this and put 2 signals here, now when you look at it, these are 2 separate rail sections. So what happens if a train is coming down on this rail and then 1 train is leaving? They could bump into each other and then just be stuck. So the way the 1-rail system works is that whatever the common rail is, it needs to be 1 complete unbroken section. So since all of this is common rail right here, it means that it needs to be 1 section with no signals. And you're probably thinking, oh man, the throughput of that's going to be really low. And you're right, it will be, but because we're using these big trains, hopefully it won't matter too much. And then later on when it does, or if it does, then we'll deal with it. And I guess I haven't pointed out either that similar to Angel Bob's, the trains in IR3 are actually quite large. So they have a storage capacity of 80, whereas the vanilla train has a storage size of 40. And I think you don't get the 80 slot trains until you're at the end of Angel Bob's. So what this means is every train's going to have 320 stacks of resources, or the equivalent of an 8-car vanilla train. So that's actually a huge throughput for one single train. So that's kind of why I'm going with this one rail system for now. But also in large part just because I want to get this done and not spend 5 episodes doing some crazy rail system that in the end we just don't really need. I think in Factorio it is important to build properly based on what your current needs are and not go nuts building something crazy that you may never actually need. Certainly when you get to end game in Mega Base, you'd want to go crazy, but even then, you still don't want to build more than your base needs, because then you're just kind of wasting time when you could be working on something that's more practical. Okay, here we go. Well, we're going to need more space. Actually be a lot faster, because walls are so hard to pick up to just use robots. Okay, now we need our unloading station, which is going to be very similar to this. And it's going to be facing the other direction. And it's probably not going to completely fit in the size of our little area here. But that's okay. And let's come down here and make a train schedule. First goes to iron load. Full cargo is fine. Then iron unload. Empty cargo. Super easy. And then there it goes. It's not super fast, but it's also running on steam, which is the worst possible fuel type, so it's not going to be fast, but it also really didn't have to go that far in the end. And now we hook everything up, and we should be completely maxing out one belt. We certainly could upgrade this to red belts if we need to, but since we're only processing iron at 5 items a second anyway, it doesn't seem necessary. And because of the position of this wall, we should probably just move that light. And it's kind of funny that it's actually sticking out the end, which actually isn't ideal. I mean, we could, I suppose, but that would be kind of weird. So let's do this, and how about put some spaces down here? And are we out of walls? Yeah, guess that makes sense. Didn't bring any extras. And now, this rail has to meet up with the main path again, as you have to do with all single-headed trains. It's just how it is. And then this one will continue to go further up there. But we need some signals, and remember that we want to keep this single rail as its own network. So we'll put a signal here to split that off, and then put one back there. So this is its own little rail, but the central rail is still one single unbroken line. Alright, so we need some walls, but enough of this train should be set up now, so we can see how it works. And let's just get it started so we can see. And the color of the train changed to match the fact that it has iron in it, and that's the automatic train and station painter that does that. And it's just kind of neat, so at a glance you can see what a train is hauling without actually having to look at the icons. We could be unloading into and out of chests as well. That would help, so that is a bit of a flaw here. However, that also dramatically increases the amount of energy that it takes, because every one of these cars is going to essentially have 3 times as many loaders, because it's 1 loader out of the car, 1 loader into a chest, and 1 loader out of the chest. So that's a lot of extra energy. Because the trains are so big, it's actually not practical to have a chest to completely hold the contents of the train, because otherwise each car would essentially need 3 iron chests. The unload speed is a lot less important. It doesn't need to have a huge buffer because it's not always going at full speed. However, it's on the loading side that you probably want to make sure that it's going at full speed if possible. So let's take it back up there. And when you do a train like this with only 1 locomotive and a large amount of wagons, it is slower than you might be used to, but it is sufficiently fast for me. It gets the job done. Let's turn it off for a second and place the walls. So one compromise we can do to have a buffer but not have it go crazy is, instead of using 3 chests, we can just use 2. And if we had very fast inserters, perhaps we can just get by with those and not use loaders, but it's kind of funny to see loader going out, loader going in. But it would essentially need to be this. So it ends up being lots and lots of loaders to do this. It's why I kind of wanted to avoid it, but it looks like it's not really going to be an option here. So if we did this, this would load the train very quickly because each car would be getting twice as much. And in fact, because we're doing this, and the fact that we have the fast loaders available, we might as well use them. So it will have a huge burst capacity here. So it would need to be like this, and of course now the train station's getting much wider, which is going to cause problems, I imagine. Although I wonder if it's possible to do it in a more flat way here. Kind of like this. Well, that is certainly flatter, because then it would come from this way. And now we have something that is perfectly copyable. This is probably going to be in the way again. Grab this, flip it to the other side. It's mostly about right. Get rid of that. I haven't done a design like this before, so it's a little bit of experimentation for me here. Okay, if we put them basically right here, that would be symmetrical, and it would also cover everything. And it would be nice to have lights every once in a while so we can, like, place them there. And finally, that can go in every direction. So it's hooked up again, and unfortunately, doing it in this way consumes a lot of loader power, because it's 120 kilowatts per loader. So it's actually a lot, but right now our factory is pretty dormant, so it's not too big a deal. But you kind of have to watch out. If you just go crazy with the loaders, it ends up being quite the energy demand. But right now, our little mine here is really only designed to do 15 a second, so that's fine. We're just trying to give it a burst loading capacity. And that's pretty good. Let's take it back to the unloading station. Might have to move things around now, but that's the cost of progress, and I see I didn't put the wall in there, so we'll have to take care of that. And we essentially want the same thing here. So if we grab this and put it in, it does basically fit. It's like the minimum size, unfortunately. So we might want to move this, but it does fit. And finally, all of this can combine to make our one belt of iron. And we might as well upgrade this to 15 a second. To do this, we can check our planner and say our output is 15 and change all these machines out too. Might as well give them the modules because we're using them now. And that gives us an idea of numbers. Of course, we just need to double what we have. And we essentially want this exact same thing. And it doesn't really matter where it goes. So let's just cut it all out. And we can always just position this in such a way where it just naturally lines up with our iron belt here. And actually that kind of lines up with these machines too. So how about we do that? And we could really smash these in here if we need to, but since this setup isn't that big right now, we can probably just leave them spaced out like this. Okay, let's see how it works. Well, so far so good. And I'm guessing we're going to need to double this up. Yep, let's do the same thing. Either the belt can come from above or below. That much doesn't matter. But what we do need is a whole nother set of these. And since this is coming from over here, we can just change the direction of this to go down. And let's block it off for a second so we can see it run at full power once everything is connected. That should be everything, so now we will have 15 iron a second. Everything has its recipe, so is this all balanced? It is. And that should more or less be 15. And we're starting to use some power again. It might help the throughput of this to do some near side switching. So that should help get rid of any of the fluctuations and keep it at 100%. And there we go. There's our 15. It's not quite going into the main bus yet because we're using it to make more rails. But all of the iron things are now being made again. It's nice to have iron finally automated like that. In goes all of the fuel, and I guess for now we'll just manually drive the train. Now we need to keep our rail network going, maintaining the single rail design here. So while this train is on this central rail, the other one will not be able to leave. So we need to keep that in mind by quickly building this and getting it off the central rail. And since there's a bunch of biters on the left, how about we do the train station part on the right? Give the train its instructions where it's full cargo, stone unload, and it's red because it can't get there right now, empty cargo. So at least now it's lined up, which means this can be lined up. And also, we now know where the walls go. So now this rail can come along the outside. And will this actually fit? You know how it is. The rail must be straight. So will that do it? There we go. I'd rather have a straight rail than a straight wall. So now we need to split this off from the rest of the network. We could just put 2 signals on each side here, but I think I would rather just kind of do it like we did on the other one where we put them there. So now by doing that, this is separated from the central rail. Okay then. Let's take it to stone unload, but it can't get there yet. Because this is on the wrong side. Gotta be careful here. Where that goes there, and that goes there. Looks kind of funny with them being right next to each other, but now we should be good. And there we go. It switches to the color of stone. And now it's on the central rail. But because these trains don't run very often, it really doesn't matter that it's hogging this entire rail section right now. And in we go. That's unloading very quickly. Wow, look at that. That's kind of why I don't like doing too many loaders, because it looks really bad on the map here with the sawtooth. But that's how it is, because they use power. So if you want to use loaders, and you want to use a lot of them, you're going to see that. Let's see, we can bring the stone in this way. And there it goes. But it did its job. And actually, can we jump this with a red belt? Mistakes were made again. But we can go around this way. And ultimately, it needs to enter somewhere. I guess we'll just do it in this same spot. And we have another vehicle that we don't need to use anymore for deliveries, and this is the last one. So at this point, every one of our resources is being automatically delivered to the factory as we consume them. So now the only limiting factor, besides the biters destroying the outposts, is just expanding when we need to. And you know what that means? More factory paving. And we should be pretty good now. This train has made it. It has completely filled up on the iron, and now it's just in balance and waiting to be used. And this one will eventually fill up, and the same will happen. Awesome. Now that we have secured all of that, we can move forward here. But that's going to have to wait until the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later.